webinar on API Lifecycle. Data is an integral part of an organization. Businesses over time generates lots of data of which pertains to special meaning. The data generated over time can be made more meaningful with the help of analytics, business intelligence tools, etc. Once we identify and categorize data streams, it would be nicer and easier to handle. To handle the creation and alteration of data in a standardized manner, to specify access of data, to orchestrate the data lifecycle, we need APIs. So in alternate world, API produce various business insights which helps either in decision making or identifying growth traits. Businesses generally put more effort on building APIs over time such that standard apps or tools can consume them. Businesses invest largely over designing, building, monitoring, and adjusting the APIs created over time to handle the huge bulk of data. The webinar will address the common problems on API lifecycle management and will take you more deep on how you can leverage your existing data sources to create APIs. My name is Abhishek Shur and I work as a Vice President of Products at InSync TechFin Solutions. I'm also awarded as Microsoft Most Valuable Professional and is also a software innovator at Intel. I have written 2 books, both addressing common problems that people face while developing good code, probably while building APIs. You can also follow me on social media handle mentioned here if you wish. I have Mr. Kaushik De, who is accompanying me, and he is the senior technical consultant working on API management stack only. He will be helping me in demoing the platform. Now the big question comes that what is an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface. Is a way for software developers to abstract away the complexity of data or applications, the business logic in such a way so that they can generate apps and services quickly. It allows applications to talk to each other, bridging the application interfaces together such that the logic is maintained centrally and application developer need not to bother about nitty-gritties of the application logic. Modern day applications prefer SOA or service-oriented architecture, which lets the companies go API first for any application development. A large number of distributed APIs are kept to any successful business that generates maximum output leveraging low resource cost. With the new global trend of making microservices for any application, API plays a vital role there too. Each individual microservices uses APIs extensively to interact and take responsible actions. Now to understand how API works for a business or a data source, let us consider the image. Here on the left side, you can see all the third-party applications that you and your partner or peers intended to build. On the right side, it shows the various data sources or services that generates data. The data sources can be a repository of large volume of data at rest, or else it could be a stream of data. API lies in between, which takes input from the data sources, does all the plumbing work themselves. For instance, they can define authentication, roles, security, rate limiting, etc. Can also produce business logic on the APIs, cleans the data from the data source, does various calculations, and generate the output to the consumer, such that when they interact with the data source or services, the job becomes easier, quicker, and very simple. If you think of a home, you are connecting electricity to various appliances that work for you using wires. Now, for end user, it is the plug and the jack that does all the work, right? You think if you put the plug on the jack provided to you, you can perform certain activities. API works similarly. It removes all the complexities and gives you a jack that is simple enough to perform certain tasks in a better way without considering large amount of complexity that can be laid down underneath. As you could now understand, API-based application development is one of the key preference of modern-day application developers. This is because, first of all, architects prefer SOA or service-oriented architecture as it is a lot easier to manage. The business logic will not be distributed over multiple applications anymore. Rather, it is centralized on one stack. For architects, if anything needs to be changed, it is the API, and modifications will automatically change the logic of all the third-party applications. Versioning is easier, disabling is easier, etc. Also, monolith applications are more complex to test. APIs are easier to test as well. There are a large number of tools which is present in the market that can track API changes, API adjustments, etc., and can test the logic of APIs easily. Not only in terms of testing, also there are a number of applications present in the market that can help in tracking performance of the application or the API rather. They can do load testing, they can identify security problems, flaws in the API, etc., which is not possible to do for various third-party applications that are built regularly based on a particular API. You can have a huge number of applications and testing them individually could be a challenge. GOF or Gang of 4 pattern are also easier to follow when you are dealing with APIs. In the GOF design pattern book, Eric Gama, Richard Helm, Ralph Johnson, and John Blasides identified design patterns that solve the common problems efficiently. Decoupling and service-oriented architecture design is one of the core for various problems identified by them. APIs follow SOA by principle, and it is a lot easier for an API to follow these design patterns. And finally, API also reduces complexity which an application developers needs to deal with, as most of the APIs follow standards like REST, SOAP, etc. protocols. Developing an application over these services are much more easier. So if you are an application developer, you must be very happy if you receive the code as web API rather than an SDK to use. SDKs have learning curves and need extra attention to understand which does what. So if you think API as an individual service, your company will first develop an API which exposes different parts of the data. Now you and your peer develop large number of applications. Each may target different set of application interfaces. For instance, you can build application which works on tablet. There are applications for web apps, for gaming console, for mobile devices, for enterprise applications, IoT devices, etc. All the applications need to do is to consume a ready-made service using HTTP protocol, perhaps using standard protocol like REST. The applications, however complex themselves could be, the complexity is easily manageable. So in the figure, you can see you as a company is only concentrating on the API and the rest will fall in place automatically. Now, if we consider the benefits of API, we can consider benefits of the APIs in terms of two personas. One for developer, which will be hugely benefited by APIs, and another the organization as a whole. For developers, as it is easier to manage and track API changes, it is easily identify API depreciates beforehand, as putting an extra header on an API is a piece of cake. Also, integration for developer is much more easier, as they mostly follow the standards and most of the developers know about it. New learning curve is much less for the APIs than that of the SDKs. APIs also help in branding. Nowadays, people make APIs open for external worlds such that anyone can consume the services to produce apps. APIs generally comes with the documentation site, which helps in digitally create authority for the data. You never know how can an API be consumed by an external world and can benefit you indirectly. Functions and methods in case of SDK is changed to action endpoints, operations, entities, etc., which makes it a lot easier to understand and develop. On the other hand, organizations also benefit a lot. First of all, it can be a source of revenue generation. As you already know, APIs help in branding. APIs also helps in reaching potential customers easily. The cost is saved, innovation is easy, are also some of the important benefits to consider. API also helps in community building. Communities are one of the important thing for many organizations. As more and more people join, the community grows. API easily create community automatically, and people talk about APIs on forums, and organizations can organically grow. Now, to understand about APIs and mutual benefit, let us consider how API lifecycle management works. If you are building an API, there are a number of phases that you need to consider before developing an API. API goes from one stage to another to perform certain actions. Once all 4 stages are complete, the old APIs go away and new revision of the API comes in. Let us understand what are the actions we generally perform in these different phases. In the design or planning phase, we start planning about the API. How does the different parts of the API look like and how security is managed for the APIs. And Web API should contain a base URL which needs to be considered correctly. Generally, people consider to choose a domain that helps them to create branding for an API. Applications that supports API management capabilities allow you to create a subdomain to register a unique URL for the API gateway installation. Licensing an API is also an important concern as API is externally exposed and anyone can access the API over www. It must include a license agreement or terms of use which helps people to decide how these APIs can be used by third parties. Another important consideration is on the security dynamics. Securing sensitive API data is also important. In this phase, you must understand what endpoints you need to secure and how you can create roles and responsibilities. The one must have task during this phase is to define endpoints and actions. Endpoints are specifically designed based on the data. We define unique URL for so as to ensure web URL can be bookmarked. Once the URL are designed properly, we define the operations over the data. The schema structure and actions performed using the action is also identified in the planning such that we can develop the API according to the need. For example, consider you are building an API that can do CRUD operation over your contacts. The endpoint name could be /contact, while the operation could be get, post, put, delete, etc. So as a developer, you are dealing with the nouns and the verbs in this phase. API tools like Swagger can help immensely during this phase. Swagger allows to design the API stack completely without connecting the data sources. It allows data mocking, which helps in trying out the API documents. The Swagger also produces open API-based YAML source, which can be used easily for actual implementation. On the build or integrate phase, you are actually creating the API. The first step is to process is either booking a domain or register an URL or a base URL. As I said, after identifying an URL based on branding, it is just a booking of a domain that you need to do. After registering the domain, your next thing to do is to identify where you are going to host the API. Once these are finalized and done correctly, you go ahead and create an API. The first thing to add is the authentication module. The authentication module will help to identify the user credentials. and also track the user activities over the API. After authentication module is in place, the next thing is to develop the API. Generally, if you are developing the API from scratch, you might go by developing the API using source code, or else you are building API using an API management product. You might be considering the API gateway while creating an API. Once the API is ready, you touch up the API specs and generate Swagger documentation. Documentation is one of the key elements for any API, as majority of the people build APIs such that external third party can easily understand the specification of the APIs. Documentation is very necessary. Swagger gives a complete documentation of the API in the tool. So one can opt that without developing the entire documentation side themselves. When defining an API, another important consideration is choosing the right API backend. Backend will help retrieve the correct data for a particular API call. During the build phase, you also identify the API backend and data sources such that you hook up the correct data for correct endpoints. In the next phase, operate and manage, you are generally doing testing, implementing the API in live to ensure the API is correctly running. Here in this phase, you might be developing different apps to check the performance of the API, or also see how the API performance can help the actual end user of the application performance. Once these things are ready, you go ahead and tune the traffic management part. You put policies such as rate limiting, generate policies that identify user based on location, IP, address, or even specific custom header on an API, etc. These things ensure security of the API. Access control is another point to consider here. In this phase, we create user profiles and generate client IDs and client secrets such that the third-party apps can be tracked easily and rate limiting can be applied in more granular level. We also consider looking at the performance analytics and statistics of the API to ensure the API is performing according to the one intended. In share and engage phase, you must have a valid API ready and you concentrate on how you can build a community out of it. The share and engage phase, you deal with the actual end users. The community can be created on the own forum, or else it can be created on other online popular forum brands or other communities. Questions need to be answered such that we make a vibrant community for the API. As community gives feedback, so API is getting continuously improved over time during this phase. The issues are tracked and implemented and deployed properly. We create revisions over APIs and deploy the changes on production. So we also start monetizing the API during this phase. We identify what are the potential buyers for an API and we apply monetizing fields on the API. Okay, now let us consider how APPSeCONNECT API management can help in producing a complete API package for your organization. APPSeCONNECT, having an experience of so many years on integration, provides a yet robust and powerful API management platform which helps you to build an API on the fly by connecting the API with data sources, both on-premise or in cloud. Some of the features of API management of APPSeCONNECT includes easy deployment, wizard-based API configuration. The UI is damn simple, and any non-technical user having a design sense of application can easily develop a powerful API over a data source. The API created through the platform follows some of the best practices developed for REST-based APIs. It follows open API standards, and you can use similar filters that are supported by OData interfaces. You can choose from different types of authentication modules which plugs in automatically on top of the API to give powerful interfacing in terms of rate limiting, authentication, tracking, etc. The API management gives just enough governance which allows you to define content that are most useful. You can create roles and expose particular enterprise grade APIs. The deployment in the platform can be continuous integration. That means an API will be automatically deployed once created and built. And yes, building an API on the API management platform is a fun. You need near to zero code while developing a complex API. So no more developers for APIs. The platform is built on pluggable policies. There are a number of policies like caching, CORS, quota management, etc., which can be applied directly on inbound and outbound sections of an API that are plugged in to the APIs. And yes, API creates Swagger documentation as well. Once you create API on the platform, you can directly go to the Swagger URL and start using it. In perspective of deployment, we provide 3 types of deployment. In PaaS offering, the enterprise data centers resides on our premise, which means any data source that we connect need to be exposed to www. The API platform connects to the data source directly to ensure data is retrieved when it is called. On hybrid scenario, you can say some part of the API comes from cloud while some part of the API is proxied using an on-premise agent. In this case, the data that resides on the on-premise network requires a tool to be installed on the network, which can be proxy the data for the API. There is also a full on-premise deployment where all the components reside on the on-premise and they are accessed through cloud. Okay, now let us go to the demo. I will hand over to Kaushik, who will demonstrate by creating an API on the platform and show you how easy it is to create and access an API on the platform. Over to you, Kaushik.
Thanks, Abhishek. Thank you all for joining this webinar. We have taken up APPSeCONNECT LLP as our case study to deep dive APPSeCONNECT API management. APPSeCONNECT LLP is a SME. It sells customized photo frames. They do not have enough IT budget to manage their ERP. They want to manage their order and inventory. They have 2 modes of getting their orders. They are getting their orders from retailers. They are also setting up some pop-up shops in different locations. So to manage this business model, we have identified few of the challenges they are facing. Delay in order fulfillment. Sales team collecting orders from marketplace throughout the day, and at the end of the day, they are passing on the orders to the delivery team. So actually, the delivery process initiates on the next day only. The second problem that we have identified is real-time stock visibility. Salespeople at the different location do not have the clarity about the stock availability. They may take orders of an item which is not even in the stock. The third problem that we have identified is quick update on discount. APPSeCONNECT once offered periodical discount to the different products to their retailers and the customer on hourly basis. But the problem is that the sales team cannot have the update on the discounts. And the fourth problem and the most important problem is that the data source access. APPSeCONNECT do not want to expose their backend to all the employees. To address these problems, they have planned to build a mobile app and circulate to the sales team. To build app, they will require some APIs. Let us check how APPSeCONNECT API management will help to build this API. The first step is that to build this API, they require to choose a technology app from the APPSeCONNECT API management module. In our case, we will choose OLEDB because their backend is a OLEDB supported database. Now the next step is to provide the credential of the backend to access the backend database. And the third is to create schema and action. Schema is nothing but the backend tables of the backend database. So that's it. Now it's time to build an API state. First, to register the URL, Pixidust, which is unique identifier of the organization. Next step is to set up the authentication. For different user, it can generate separate authentication. Now let's go and create an API. In our case, this is a wizard actually to create an API. So you have to fill up all these informations like name of the API, suffix, to enable or disable the API, to methods like get, port, post, put, etc. etc. You can also set up the version of the API. In our case, we'll take up an API already that we have created, and top of that we'll create a get method. So this is where we are setting the HTTP method, and we can set up as a state as a release or whatever you want. This is where you have to set up the version. Now in the backend services, we have to select the app that we earlier have created in our earlier step. We have to set the credential. We have to select the schema.
Yeah, and action.
And action, obviously, yeah. Now it's done, and save it. Press continue. There are some more options. If you can look at policies, inbound policies and outbound policies, that will come in later of my presentation. This is what you can customize your response. Go back to the API list, and yes, our get API is ready. So let's test it. So now we have the Swagger endpoint ready in our portal. So we'll just click it, and it will automatically list all the APIs that we have created in our portal. Set the client ID and client secret that we set at the section of authentication. We'll just copy and paste it. Okay. So here we have Swagger has listed all the APIs that we have created. We'll test our get API. Click on execute. Here you can see the backend data, the sales order data. We have two sales orders, order 1 and order 2, and these are all informations that is there in the backend. So this API can be used for the mobile app to check the orders, whether it is just for the confirmation whether the order is placed or not. So this place is actually to filter, like select some part of the data. We can order the data. We can have the top like 2 or 3 informations like that.
Okay.
So now we will test the post API that we earlier have created, and you can see in the screen, so that the sales team can post the sales order direct from the market. Here we are showing it through the postman, but this API can be used in the mobile app. So we are going to create a new sales order, order 3, which is not there in the backend. So it is created. We'll check backend, but before that, we are going to check some more functionality in the APPSeCONNECT API module. Suppose you want to restrict some few of the users to access this API. So in that case, you can set up a policy. So in our case, we are going to set up inbound policy, and we will select validate HTTP header. So those who will have the proper HTTP header request, they will only be able to push the sales order, and rest will be restricted. So let's check it. So this is what the policy is. Now in header area, we are not setting up the giving the HTTP header, and let's check whether it is going to push in the backend or not. So the same order with the serial number 4 that we're going to push. Let's click on the send button. Yeah, as you can see, invalid HTTP header. So basically the same API can be restricted within a group of user only. So now we will try with the HTTP header that we have set up in our policy section. We'll copy this header, we'll paste it from the value of the header. Okay, it's done. Now it's pushed. So let's go to the backend and let's check whether this 3 and 4 has been pushed or not. Yeah, the order 4 is pushed. So there are so many other policies that can be set up in the APPSeCONNECT module, API module, that you can check in our training section.
Okay, so it looks very good. I mean, you have created an API and you have successfully executed it using a special policy. You have applied a policy, etc.
And within few clicks only.
Yeah. It's very good. So let us delve a little bit more on the Get APIs. We can create new versions, I think.
So now what we are going to showcase is we will create another version v2 where we will retrieve the data from the same table but limited columns, limited informations. Now how to do that? Let's check. Let's see. We'll select the same app, same version, same credential, but different action that we're going to select.
So we will choose, I think, get all orders.
No, this time we are not going to select limited orders. We have to create another.
Yeah. So in action, I think you have to put some logic.
Yes.
Which
yes,
will.
yes.
Yeah. So
this is what we are going to change now. We'll just click here, and we'll directly step into the action filter section. Now what we'll do? We'll take up only two columns. One is order ID, and second is so from the same data source, from the same table, we are just creating another version, and we'll have limited data.
So you are only selecting two columns. Only.
Yeah, that's it.
So I think the column name is mistyped.
Yeah.
Yeah, column names are mistyped.
Yeah. Let me change it. Now it's changed.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
So let's run this API. So here you can see there are two versions. One is v1, another is v2. with the same GET API.
Yeah.
And we'll check the second one.
So you will have to again put the authentication.
Yeah, authentication. Correct.
Yeah.
I'll just copy it from here because
I have to put the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you are using another user for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
So let's update it and send it.
So we have not applied any of the APIs, any
Yeah.
of the policies, right?
No. Now see, there are two fields only.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah. So we have successfully changed an API. We have pulled and all the data from API, and now we are pulling a part of the data.
And it took hardly 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah,
as you can see.
Pretty good. So anything else you want to show?
I think I should show you the filter that you can also apply from the URL also. So now what we'll check, we'll retrieve a specific sales order. So in our case, we'll take up the sales order 1.
So it seems an OData style of filter.
Yeah. It's simply OData standard that we have maintained. So this is the complete information of the product. So there are so many API that we can build actually. In our case, we have showcased only 2. One is product and another is
and there is order by as well. So you can order
the ascending and descending order. So that's all from my side.
Pretty good.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the lovely demo, Kaushik.
Thank you.
So let us continue with the presentation. So as you already know about the APIs and how to manage APIs, let us consider some of the use cases which will help you to see how APIs work great for some of the big giants. In this example, we show Amazon Marketplace. Amazon creates only an API for every communication. A large number of developer community works on the API to develop different apps. Amazon also creates a lot of affiliate sites using the API, the mobile apps, etc., to ensure the API works correctly, and they use the API largely for commercial purposes. So a large amount of business done by Amazon, I mean in billions of amount, is done through only by connecting APIs. Another example is TripAdvisor. As statistics says, TripAdvisor works with 700 partners who create thousands of third-party apps. 50,000. You can see the number here. See the power of APIs. 300 million unique visitors directly access APIs to show different things of the API. The users reach different brands and targets different market using the APIs. Company does in billions by marketing and branding the APIs only. The Fitbit you might have heard of also works with API. Literally speaking, Fitbit created this whole ecosystem of applications only by hiring one developer. All applications built on top of the Fitbit is created by third-party developers. They say they have saved 1 million of development cost by just creating an API. Last but not the least, let us talk about us. Our integration platform is built using APIs. 90% of the things that we have developed is through APIs. We generally encourage APIs rather than data sources. Only when the customer does not want to use APIs, we go directly communicate with the data sources. We extensively use APIs to connect a whole gamut of applications. Thereby, we serve 650 plus customers in 65 plus countries and 120 plus partners, all working together on the same platform. We have developed more than 300 plus prepackaged connectors built by a very small team of developers. We have partnered with OEMs like SAP, Magento, Shopify, etc., and ISVs who build these integrations for us. And yes, we generate 2x revenue every year by leveraging the APIs. So as to summarize what we got from the session, APIs are the part and parcel of next generation products and services. APIs help to create platforms. APIs enable asymmetric business model so as to tackle different business scenarios. We put the efforts to the developer of the applications to explore the market by building the APIs. API also builds a strong community and helps organizations to get acceleration on growth organically. API also pays. You can monetize APIs anytime. Security is also a big concern. Hence, standard security measures need to be taken when building an API, and it should be time tested. And popularly nowadays, people target these API management platforms. And finally, monitoring and managing APIs in the long run develops trust to the community. Okay, thanks for joining the session. We are open for questions. If you have any question, you can put the question on the question answer panel. I would love to answer. So if you are finding any difficulties regarding APIs and building an API, you can put in questions. I think there are a few questions already. How do you know if there is change in an API and apps breaks? Okay, so this is a common problem for many developers. How do we know the API? So basically, if you are using standard platforms, they give you, I mean, for APPSeCONNECT platform, we provide you an option to, so such that when a revision of an API is created, our platform will automatically generate a special header. So it depends on the API developer. If the developer have already given a special header if application has an update on an API. So basically, let's say if you are using an WooCommerce API and WooCommerce updates the API, so it's the responsibility of WooCommerce to give you a indication on a particular call that there is a new update came in, and this API will eventually deprecate. So basically, by this, if we develop an application where we track these kind of headers, we can easily do that. Any more questions? Yeah. Okay. So Aaron, it's a good question. So I hope it answers it correctly. Yes, of course. So if you have an API and it is broken, then you would get a response that this API is not working. So you will get an error message if API is broken. So either it is 403, basically when API gets changed, people changes the filtering criteria, or the standard thing is the schema, there are new fields being added. So in that case, you might face a bad request. So in your program, you can develop something which actually tracks the bad request and create an alert. So this is how you can actually track if API is broken. So generally, for best case scenario, it is often good to have a special header in place, which allows the API developer to easily track that there is a change in API. Yeah. So he says if it is possible to email the developer. Yes, of course. So if you have touch with the APIs with the developer, you can definitely go ahead and call the developer. Or sometimes if you are working with public APIs, you might have some APIs which are hosted in GitHub. So you can post an issue over GitHub And there are a lot of discussions going on GitHub, which will help you to identify whether there is a change in API coming up or not. Yeah. I hope there is no more questions. So if you have any query, you can post it here, or you can directly mail us. So what we will do, we will answer all your questions over email. So that's it for the day. Thank you for joining us. It is fun working with you, and we have and thank you Kaushik for giving an awesome demo.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Okay, thank you. See you next time.